There we go. Okay, Josh, I think we're ready for this experiment.
Let's try it.
We're in the same room, so hopefully your audio comes out right. So education's modern moral schism. Now this is basically just a preview of what we'd be doing for that teachers conference. So you thought we needed to start talking off with like that history of when the Protestant sort of Catholic split started, or how would you handle the question, Josh? Like, education's facing its biggest coherent test since the Catholic Protestant schism of the 1800s. So looking at the great awakening of today. So where do you think we should start with that one, Josh?
Yeah, let's I think we start with our framework, right? So we're going to look at this from a social contract lens, but looking at this as wokeism as a religion seems to make the most sense that we found.
Right? You know, when you look at that as wokeism as a religion, why would you like jump? Are you jumping to that assumption, or why do you like when you come into this?
No, that's we have some experience looking at religions, right? We have backgrounds looking at religions, so we're going to have to spend some time defining what a religion is, and then proving that this wokeism stuff fits into that.
Just because people assume that religion always has to be supernatural,
right? Yeah.
And since the rise of the new atheists in the 2000s, we sort of found out that no, you've got a lot of religions that are best defined in terms of the dynamics, the behaviors, not just very arbitrary set of definitions. Like, is Scientology a religion?
Right.
You'd obviously say yes, right? Because it has a moral value. It leads to, here is this end of ideas. These behaviors which are leading to this history are good. These ones leading to this are bad, and they are good and bad in and of themselves based upon whether they agree with some moral agent or lead to a certain moralized outcome.
Right. Yeah. The morals that come out of religion, but not only the behavior and the morals that come out of an individual, but also the structure of a religion. It has rituals. It has a form of priesthood. It has outside rules that people are using. And even though it's not supernatural, there is a belief structure that is adopted that can't be seen in the world in the same way that a supernatural God wouldn't be seen. There's certain things that have to be believed that aren't provable.
Almost like that faith-based test.
Right. Yeah, it's a faith-based test, right? And those would be things like systemic racism, that sort of thing. You can't see it, can't point to it, you can't point to a law, but it is a belief that has to be adopted in order to join the religion, in order to.
And the cognitive psychologist like Scott Atran would say, then what happens is you have a set of beliefs that are mostly factual, but there's that 10-20% that just stretch credulity to a point that, yeah, you can believe it if you're in and buy in, and then it makes total sense. And then you get deeper in this rabbit hole. And that belief systems, and especially adaptive groups, they form like a religion, have that certain set of beliefs that from the outside you'd say, oh, these are crazy. But once you get in them, they seem totally rational because they align you with the group. They make sense. And then the additional point I would add on to yours for that definition of religion is it is the degree of group back to individual feedback. And Scott Atran adds that into his definitions of religion, where if the group is controlling you and influencing you, whether just by environment, peer pressure, or just assumptions of what should happen, if that level of influence reaches a certain threshold, then this becomes now a religion, or at least a moral group agent.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And then from there, we will take a look at probably wokeism in general, and then wokeism in education in particular.
Or do you think you need to start off with the history of the Catholic split? Because if you jump in with like, hey, wokeism is religion, are you just like putting the cart before the horse?
Yeah, you're probably right. That let's look at a specific religious event that is comparable, right? Once you get that religious definition, then it is good to. It becomes so easy to see the religion, the religious aspects in full. places.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's happened with our journey over the last few
Right.
years is you start thinking, oh, this is a crazy idea. And then you look at it and you're like, wait, no, this makes sense. This makes sense. And now these ideas just seem natural. And it seems like the additional point I'd add to that is it seems like a lot of the leading thinkers in the field are heading that way as we're seeing wokeism by more and more, say, political figures saying, oh, this is a religion. And I think we were like a couple years ahead of the curve on that one, Josh.
Yeah, we saw that. We saw that coming.
So then, I mean, let's jump back to the dynamics of that sort of 1800s, because we have this time period where education is just starting to form. We used to have sort of the Bible schools that each denomination would sort of use to teach the Bible, and that's how the kids would learn how to read or to write, was through Bible study classes, and each denomination had that. And then we started to move into the common school era, as we said. You know, the various branches, at least here in the West in the United States, were saying, hey, do we learn just the Methodist interpretation of the Bible, just the Presbyterian interpretation? So do we add commentary to that or not? And so it started where the sort of universalizing idea or the progressive was, we'll just teach the Bible without commentary. Wow, look how radical that is. And you're sort of laughing, right? Like today we think of that as funny, but starts that common school era. And then they come into the questions as to, well, in this parish, we can't just assume that one denomination gets to control everything. We have to start to be pluralistic. And so now that hits education, and there's also this integration of what do the aristocrats do that have the private tutors. They learn the great classic works, and those great classic works aren't just the Bible, that they want a common story, history that they can tie to. And then that can get used for some other stuff, but you'll always study the great works to help you understand how to read or write or how to talk or how to do math or how to do commerce or what moral obligations are. And so as that's starting to come, that common school era, there's also this pressure of mass immigration from, you know, Northern Europe with all the famines that were happening. And you get a lot of papists, sort of people who supported the Catholic Church, which was in contradiction to, say, the Protestants that had basically taken over the Americas at that point. And that's where you start to hit this friction. And that friction seems to come from, let's educate, let's be really progressive, and we will view the education of the whole child, and we will help them be a moral character necessary for commerce in this United States that won't destroy the progress of the revolution of us removing papist sentiments of having an authoritarian figure, where we need to be more democratic and under these rules and constitutions. And you better learn what these rules and norms are so you can integrate and not sweep us in and upset the balance that has been created. So that's, I think, the history that we're getting to in the Catholic Protestant split.
Right.
But I mean, what color do you think people need with that, or what's going to be interesting and relevant for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the tension still exists between what you're teaching in a good education that's for everyone, compared to what morals are being taught and what religion's being adopted, right? At the time is very explicit. This is a Protestant school, this is a Baptist school, this is a sort of Baptist population. But then, like you said, when you have a bunch of Catholics that move into the community, do they go to the same school? Or do they start their own school? And if so, which doctrine do you teach, right? And
if you make it so, oh no, we're not teaching a religious doctrine, this is just the necessary character education, right? Then you can slide a lot of the wolf in the sheep's clothing, right?
That's right, yeah, 100%. So then that tension between, like, that question is, what do we teach? What exactly is the sort of central moral education that applies to all Christian religions? And then teasing that out became the question of the day. Can we have a strictly Catholic school or Protestant school, or is it an everyone school? And if it's an everyone school, then what exactly is being taught about the Bible?
Yeah, and I think it was that hidden assumption of, this isn't explicitly religious education, this is moral education to help our towns cohere and our states and counties cohere. And they pulled the wool over the eyes of these other people until it became very overt that, hey, you're not just teaching citizenship education. You've broken some social contracts. And the social contracts were, we were sending our kids to you to get an education about facts and objectivity, about how to read, how to write, some basics of the upper class of commerce and mercantilism, and just a basic framework for communication in a pluralistic society. And then what was slipped into that was, and here's the way it has to be done that exceeds the social contracts that the people had acceded to. And I think it was at that point where the Catholics got their fur ruffled, and other people did. They just weren't a big enough group to be able to do anything about it. And the Catholics did, and they did it by saying, well, you're not listening to us, off we go. And we will spin up something to compete so we don't get fully assimilated. And I wonder, I think that's today.
Yeah,
it seems to be the parallel.
Directly today, right? There's a large movement of people today that are feeling like the things that are being slipped in under the radar in our education is not what they want their kids to learn, and so they're looking for a way out. Either we assimilate into this, or we're going to start our own schools, start our own charter schools, go online or wherever, right?
And the rhetorical baggage seems very similar too. It's like back in that day of the Catholic Protestant split, when I look at the history that I know of, is if you rejected these things, then you were rejecting the whole Bible, the whole Western tradition. And it's like, well, no, you're making some strawman attacks and ad hominems. And I wonder if we don't see those same dynamics happening today. If you reject this piece of this curriculum because you think it's breaking social contracts, whether good or bad, then you're demonized as X and Y and Z.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think we see that. That should be pretty obvious, right? For people that you talk to, right? I just want reading, writing, and math to be taught. And if you're slipping in this other stuff, I agree with that. That doesn't mean I don't want an education for my child, right? But
so I mean, that makes it, I think the way to then tackle that would be then, that's why the social contract, I threw that in, is like, it seems what's happening is people get offended because they're like, well, I never agreed to this explicitly. You're just keep pushing and pushing. And at some point that push you tolerate, okay, I can accept it for a bit. But then at some point when the zealousness of the people, the mass size of those people, the righteousness that they're taking these ideas to comes out, then I think it requires explicit conversations. If not, the groups start to feel more and more marginalized. And I think that's what I see happening in education, with why we're seeing the reactionary forces down in the States rising up against this stuff. Do you see the same thing, or do you see it differently?
I see the same thing, yeah. There's a mass exodus to homeschooling, I think, because of that inability to talk it out, right? Because of these things, I think, are being presented as almost moral religious goods, ideas that have to be accepted, or else you're some kind of irreligious person, to use the word. And then people just say, well, I'm out then. If we can't even talk about it, then I'll do homeschool. There's a mass exodus.
And that might be that breaking point, is if you're not allowing open conversation, then that's a signal that how are you ever going to listen to me? You won't even allow me to talk, or to talk authentically.
Right. And that's it feels like we're drifting into politics. It's actually religious conversation, right? Once you're not allowing discussion on things, that's we're going to present as a religious position. It's like a cult-like stance. You are either in or out. You have to accept this doctrine, or you're a sinner.
Yeah, that blasphemy, clean hands. You can only speak if you come from the right background, or are from the right religious heritage, or are a believer. And I think James Lindsay had a nice take on that, saying what you're seeing is the Gnostic elements of religion creeping up. And so religions, I mean, we're referring to it, but we're referring to it more as a specific dynamics of a group that has a very ardent belief with a definite end of history in mind as a what do we call it, utopian end, and we can make the world a better place if we just, and then it's based upon sort of some faith statements that are mixed in with things that are arguably true and things that seems evidence from the social psychology and social dynamics. Hey, why don't we help all people? That's great.
Right.
No one would argue that. And so you get these talking points that a religion stumbles into that then can't be argued against as, oh, how do you not believe that this is transmitted down through correct authority? Or how do you not believe that this confessing to this thing is a way to save yourself, right? And I think the progressivist elements in education have stumbled into a similar solution where they're formulating right now just those exact talking points until they stumble into one that becomes impossible to argue against without also opening up yourself for these attacks of blasphemy. And that's why I think the Gnosticism angle is actually interesting from Lindsay. Have you heard of that one before?
No, I know a bit about Gnostics, but I'm not sure how he's applied that to education. Yeah.
So what he said was, when he looks at that, the Gnosticism was based upon this revelation that you had. So as an individual, because of your spiritual experience or connection with stuff, you have been revealed knowledge that other people can't have. So if you're a member of Church X, then, and you had these experiences, you now are in a different position to talk about things with authority that no one from the outside can question because they haven't had those same experiences.
Right.
And so that's the appeal to authority, that if you aren't of group X, color Y, background Z, then you can't authentically speak to those. And I mean, that seems valid to a point. To a point, it's not valid because we all have common humanality. We can anticipate and assume that, hey, these things can be true or can be projected onto other things. And I can use my abstract reasoning skills to assume, okay, here's what it's like. I've had this oppression in my life when I've had that. Okay, I understand it a bit. I may not understand it fully, but it doesn't set up that hard and fast black and white where you have no ability to say, which was what the Gnostics do.
Yeah, that Gnostic movement goes back thousands of years to early Christianity, right? Where there's a group of Christians that felt like they had, or actually did have, or whatever, had some kind of special personalized knowledge that gave them authority, that those people are going to make it to heaven, or whatever their argument was then. But that idea of specialized knowledge, and that tension between needing specialized knowledge to be successful, that's probably not the right word, and the universality, right? In that context, do you need special knowledge to make it to heaven, or is there a universal way where everyone gets to heaven, right? And the Gnostics were very much, there has to be special knowledge gained in order to get there.
And it seems like that's a trend that you'd see in previous societies, even before the emergence of Christianity or Islam, is you'll see traditional societies with their upper classes claiming to have access to special knowledge that the commoners wouldn't. And it seems like it's a biological solution to the innate tendencies of us to form classes or castes based upon need for hierarchy as a way of organizing larger and larger groups. And so what we might see happening today in terms of education is those same dynamics being at play, those evolutionary dynamics, leading into a solution space that then allows one to say, I have special knowledge, therefore I should be able to be in a control position because we can fix the system. And then Marx's theory of you sort of usurping the bottom into the top makes sense, because then who should be on top is whoever gets to claim that special position, which seems to be a fundamental break of the pluralistic nature of education, which was we all get together to decide what should be commonly taught amongst all of us. And there will be things that we purposely stay away from, because if you teach them, one group will be offended. If you don't teach them, another group will be offended. And you sort of say, well, we just need to carve out a space of what we can all agree on. It seemed historically what emerged after that Catholic Protestant split was a pullback on what it means to be citizenship education. And it was, well, let's focus on the skills we need for actual trade. And then you had that shift to vocation, and we said, oh, but we're missing out some of the more theoretical ideas because we're just leaving the poor people in to be workers and
Right.
slaves.
Right.
So you always have this bounce back between vocational and academic education,
Right.
and education that's best for the interests of a localized group. Well, maybe we do need to get a job, but if we do that for everyone, we're pigeonholing them. And so you get these cycles in education that I think we're still experiencing as a driver for a lot of these other behaviors.
Right. Right. Yeah. And in terms of today, we're starting to see that. I think you were telling me about that need for a hierarchy to develop among the upper class, sort of upper echelon of people. And it seems to me that there's the faith precedes the miracle kind of principle, where you adopt certain beliefs and that allows you to be in the hierarchy. And then from there, there's the miracle of, what we're supposed to do with everyone.
It's almost like that. Education terms it transformational change. Hey, if you do this right now, it's not going to work. But if we get enough people to buy in, it will change the conditions and the underlying assumptions such that it can work and we can accomplish the impossible. And that's the transformational change literature in education, really popular in the late 90s into the 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that I feel like that's to the point of almost doctrinal statements. If you accept whether it's systemic racism or you accept these doctrines, then you're automatically in that hierarchy. Whereas if you reject it, then you're out and down with the lower class.
And that seems to be why I think as educators, no matter what you do, you're going to be the devil to somebody.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, because if you teach these things, then you're going to offend the other group that didn't accede to those or has different beliefs or wants them nuanced in particular ways. And if you don't teach them, then you're seen as an evil person who isn't supporting, in the progressive case, the marginalized people in them. When that isn't, I don't think, the answer. It's just that in order to keep education pluralistic, you're going to have to come with some decisions as to what we should and what we shouldn't. And if there isn't a quid pro quo trade of I'll give up this, you give up this, and we can live with this, then it is all going to be power dynamics of one side will win, one side will lose. And what we see happening, I think, in that is what we saw with the 1800s is, okay, if you want to play that game, why should I play it?
Right. We'll just start it out in school and we'll be done.
Yeah. And that tension in the West of separation,
Right.
of the society splitting into two, red and blue, or orange and blue, right? In education, that's the worry, I think. And I think it's a foundation. It's true. We've seen it historically.
Yeah, I think we're watching it happen. The inability for sides to talk to each other. And that's why we're interested in doing this, right? Because we don't want that to happen. And we feel like the solution to that problem is to be more pluralistic, to accept, to be teaching multiple doctrines. And if we can show that,
or trying to minimize the amount of sort of moral baggage one has to bring into class.
Right. Yeah. That's a good way of saying it. We can.
So then, how do you handle?
We'll survive the tension.
So I mean, that raises a question, though. How do you handle a need to teach the whole child? Because we're seeing the role of education wanting to be bigger and bigger. Hey, tackle these social issues, tackle these movement to a whole child education instead of just an objective academic standard. So is it inevitable that we're going to have to bring morality and therefore religion and quasi-religion into it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the discussion that needs to be had. That's not happening, right? Because that discussion is assumed to be done.
Yeah,
that we're getting this kind of split where half the people feel like they're not heard, half the teachers feel like they're not heard, they're not represented.
So there's that assumption. Yes, we will bring religion into it. We won't call it religion because it's mine. It's just truth.
Right.
And you will like it because transformation, if you get used to it a little bit, you'll find it's not bad. So get used to it a lot. And then you'll come over to our side and you'll see all the good things. Here are my glasses. Welcome to the world. And it's sort of surprising that because the discourse is such that any resistance to that idea is demonized and deplatformed, that we don't hear good arguments against that to say, hey, watch out. There's a reason why you don't want to just say, hey, this is correct, and I will assume that anyone who denies it just needs a transformation.
Perfect. Yeah, if you would only be converted, then it would make sense. Right?
Yeah, and then you won't see it as a religion, you'll just see it as the inevitability of the end of history.
Yeah, it's reality. Yeah.
So then, like, the thing we're trying to bring in as we present this is, as an educator, no matter what you do, you're going to be demonized by one side or the other.
Right.
Because as you move to these whole child issues, they necessarily bring in all these moral things that if you do, you're damned. If you don't, you're damned.
Right.
And if you don't teach the curriculum now retuned in terms of the whole child and moral issues, you're not doing your job. And so as an educator, I see that tension in the people I work with is, oh,
Yeah.
what do I do?
Yeah, I feel that tension all the time, right? That's what exactly do I have to teach? What do I have to say? Am I going to get to a point where I disagree with the morals of what I'm teaching, and therefore am I going to have to take a stand or quit or be fired? Or how far can I go with this? If someone walks in, am I in trouble? That kind of thing, right? It's a very...
Yeah, and on the right, I think we look at the left and say, oh, they don't have these worries because they're all, the whole media, educational institution, unions, everything is on their side, right?
Right.
All the institutions are co-opted for one answer, but I don't think that that's accurate. I think on the left, I would imagine there are a lot of teachers who are very worried. Can I do this? Am I going to get in trouble now with the conservative government or conservative parents? So I think those tensions and worries are on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's such a polarized environment, right?
Yeah. Now I'd be tempted to say, look at the level of institutional capture in the sides to know what's happening, but then noisy reactionary parents can sure raise a, right? They have a voice in education. And that's why I also see the dynamics of trying to minimize the voice of parents in education as a solution to prevent complaints, so that the system now can go to a single sort of assimilative tendency. And I think there's a lot of people that would say, that's just, I'm tired of this back and forth. Just let one side win, and here's the side that's going to win. So if you don't give up, you're just a stick in the mud. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and at a small school, that's a real thing. We have the parents in the community are enough of a number that if they pull our kids, it's a significant enough event that our school might not survive, right?
See, and then that gets into that school choice discussion that I think we'll have to leave for another day. But now with the potential of walking to other service providers, what does that mean for you as a teacher or as a school administrator or superintendent or provincial manager? Is people can walk, and you can say we'll legislate it not to. But unless you go to Germany where you start incarcerating people who aren't sending their kid to that particular school, and that's what I worry about, is you're going to double down into that type of dynamics, not all at once, but
piecemeal that happens.
Yeah, one step, next step, 3 steps. So any final words, Josh, for today?
Well, just the hopeful nature of where we've gone since we've started. And I just appreciate that we've stayed, I feel like, above the right-left dynamic, that there's a lot more going on that as we move forward and teach, the dynamics between small group and large group dynamics seems to make way more sense than having the right side conservatives and the left side liberals. It seems to be so much more beyond that.
Yeah, it seems like if you get down to the fundamental biology of seeing what the human tendencies are, then you don't have to moralize them.
Yeah,
there isn't a right or a wrong. It's just
framework, I feel like, for understanding and seeing a future path out, other than, like you say, letting one side win or arguing for one side against the other side, and then what do you do with them when you win, right? And so I'm hopeful about our solutions.
Sounds good.